Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me again on a Sunday. I want to thank everyone who's here for being here. Many of you have been part of this group since the beginning, over a year ago. So thank you for being here. And for those who are new, welcome. There are a whole series of these that stretch back over a year. I would suggest you go back and start watching them from the beginning, because each one of these builds on information from the one before. So constantly I'm referring back to, I've mentioned this before, and I'll give sort of a brief overview of what that means, but the in-depth information is in the past, in previous live streams. This is an evolving movement seeking its own way, seemingly by itself, from manipulation on high, I think. But here is where you can go to at the end of today to get today's soundtrack. If you're new, make sure you have headphones. We listen with headphones here. We're trying to synchronize the hemispheres with different frequencies on both sides. Create a mind link, global mind link among all the people who are listening to the same brain entrainment soundtrack at the same time. This is where you can go to ask any question that has to do with anything we've covered on these live streams. Scientific Sounds, ask a question. And here's where you can go to see all the live streams, all the way back to the beginning. This is my YouTube channel. Also, please spread the word. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Search for Dr. Jeffrey Thompson. Instagram at Dr. Jeffrey Thompson. You'll find me. So this is the third in a mini series on esoteric anatomy, the exploration of what's here under the hood in our own bodies that some deep part of our mind has created from scratch and differentiated the tissues based on some blueprint. Of course, someone made the blueprint too and then read the blueprint and differentiated the tissues, make them all run on automatic without me thinking about it. And I seem to be up here in my rational thinking mind, disconnected from what's going on down here that was grown by this own body. And I haven't seen that in anatomy or physiology that the nature in general makes any big mistakes, and that grown out of nature, this body has made any big mistakes either. Everything seems to have been worked out nicely to the nth degree of detail. There are no accidents. That means that the way the body is organized is specifically following a series of actually pretty simple rules. Most of those rules have to do with survival as number one, and then various other rules that nest underneath that. But the very first order of business is to survive. Otherwise, what's the point, right? So when we pick up, from where we were before, here is where it begins. The blueprint is in here. The DNA and the 4 base pairs and the 64 codons that, as I said before, align with the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching. And Carl Jung's description, where the 23 chromosomes from the mother and 23 from the father come together, and this magic thing begins to come about. Sperm and egg come together, and the blueprint begins to be read, and a body begins to be manufactured. And according to Carl Jung, in the introduction to this book, the Wilhelm Baines edition, the introduction written by Carl Jung, he addresses this whole idea of the idea that that everything that happens to me is stored in memory. Every iota, every smallest particle of all my experiences, moment by moment, are deposited in a storehouse of information in my DNA. And at the moment that I give my half of the sperm egg, 23 chromosomes of each half, all of my memories are in that 23 chromosomes, and of the mother and the father. And when they come together to 46 chromosomes and begin this process of growth, turning into a person, that DNA holds all the memories, every iota of everything that happened to both the mother and the father from the moment when they were conceived, when sperm and egg came together and began that process for them. Which means that their parents and their parents and their parents, my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, great-great-great-great-great-great, all of those people, the entire population of all people who have come before me so that I could be the end result of the top of this pyramid right now, all of their memories are stored in my DNA. The difficulty is, as we mentioned last time, is that very quickly you can see that an exponential multiplication of great-great-great and great-great-great-grandparents at the bottom of this huge pyramid that's starting to form with me at the top. The further back you go in time, the more and more and more people are at the base of this pyramid, doubling at each generation, until there's millions of people at the base of your own pyramid, the further you go back in time. However, when you look at history of Earth, the further you go back in time, the less and less and less number of people there were on Earth. So how do the two of those jibe? Because my genetic tree gets bigger and bigger the further I go back, but history shows less and less people the further I go back. And so the only way you can reconcile that with the pyramids of all the people that are on Earth right now is for all of those pyramids to overlap with each other and share DNA memories. That means that we're all, every one of us, related to each other genetically. And at some place in the collective unconscious, all of our memories coincide, and that means each one of us has access to the memory of every living being who has ever lived in the past for each and every person on Earth. So Jung's take on the idea of past life memories and past life psychotherapy work was it's potentially possible that I could have a past life memory of any human being ever, anywhere, at any time in the past, and it would be valid. But then his caveat is it doesn't actually matter whether that's true or not, whether past life memories actually exist or not, me living in a past lifetime in a different body in Egypt or something. It doesn't matter if that's true or not, because as long as something gets resolved at a collective unconscious level, I may just be using the metaphor of Egypt and being a priest in my unconscious language of my unconscious mind, which is dream imagery and allegory and metaphor. It may just be a metaphor for me, Egypt. But as long as it resolves the issue, it doesn't matter whether it was a real past life memory or just a metaphor at an unconscious language level. The result is the same. So when we look at just the sort of mind-blowing magnificence of what's stored in the DNA, the DNA, just as a sidebar, you've got all the cells in your body are contained inside of a membrane, and then inside there are all these little organelles, and at the center of all that is the nucleus of the cell, the brain of the cell, so to speak, and inside the nucleus is this DNA. And the DNA is like a manufacturing plant for proteins. And the RNA, ribonucleic acid, DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid, all these big fancy schmancy names. But the RNA is like the library of blueprints for all the different kinds of proteins that the manufacturing plant would manufacture, the DNA. So the RNA is a library of blueprints, and the DNA is the manufacturing plant that's waiting for a blueprint to arrive to tell it what it's supposed to be manufacturing. And the mRNA, the messenger RNA, the messenger ribonucleic acid, is the post office. It's the courier, actually. It's a private courier who goes to the library. The librarian says, we need, I'm giving you 3 blueprints because we need this and this and this protein to rebuild this tissue at XY coordinate in the body. Order has come down from the autonomic nervous system to rebuild this tissue because it's working on its list of things to maintain. The mRNA takes the mailer with the 3 blueprints, shuttles it over to the DNA in the nucleus of the cell, delivers the blueprints to the DNA. The DNA pops those out and inserts them into their floppy drives, and the DNA begins to manufacture these proteins. The proteins are then shuttled out of the shell to the cell, to the place where they're supposed to rebuild other tissues somewhere in the body, and that's how that whole system works. Which brings us up to the present day with the mRNA vaccine and how that works, which is essentially a really brilliant idea on the one hand, and on the other hand, has built-in potential problems like everything. You can't get away from it. And that's the current questioning that I have about it. On the one hand, it's brilliant because now what's happening is scientists have figured out a way of making an artificial lab-grown mRNA courier with a fake blueprint that supposedly has come from the RNA. But the DNA doesn't know that because it's counterfeit, and it's a really good job of counterfeiting. So now what's happening is the mRNA, this lab-grown fake mRNA, arrives at the DNA manufacturing plant with a fake blueprint. And the blueprint is for a protein, what's called a spike protein, that exists on the outside of the membrane of the COVID-19 virus. And this spike protein is the protein that the virus uses to attach to the cell and trick the cell into opening up its doors and allowing the virus to inject its RNA into the cell and invade the DNA, wrap around it, and commandeer the cell, commandeer the DNA into now manufacturing more virus instead of what it is used to manufacturing from the actual real blueprints from the RNA. It's being commandeered. So essentially what the vaccine companies have done is create a artificial virus. The mRNA, a virus is actually really weird. When I was studying cellular biology in school and immunology and all of this stuff, in the great depths that you could learn it from a medical standpoint, viruses are weird. They're not even technically alive. The definition of something that's alive has to have intent, it has to have metabolism, it has to have some kind of a brain, and it has to reproduce. And A virus has no moving parts, no brain, no metabolic processes, nothing inside. Many of these viruses look like a landing module with four legs sticking out that lands and legs attach. It's actually a hexagon-shaped protein shell that's empty. Nothing is inside except a strand of RNA. It's an empty thing. They don't even know how it's alive. They don't know how it could have purpose because it's not technically alive at all. It's sort of a automaton robot or something. It's bizarre. And it lands on the cell and it injects its RNA through some mechanism that's tricking the cell. The RNA goes into the DNA, transforms it into manufacturing more virus, and then it spews those viruses out to invade other cells. The mRNA now is the artificial mRNA from the vaccine travels to the DNA, imparts its blueprint, which is fake, and the blueprint tricks the DNA into manufacturing the spike protein and then spewing that spike protein out into the body. And as soon as the body sees this weird foreign protein, it freaks out and it has a huge immune response and starts attacking it. And it attacks it wherever it finds it. And so the purpose of this is going to attack the COVID-19 viruses, which have the spike protein on the outside of their virus as well. So it's a brilliant, wonderful way of getting the body to see the COVID-19 virus and attack its spike protein, which is what it needs to attach to your cell. If it doesn't have it, it can't attach to your cell. Now it's just floating around. Like I said, brilliant idea. They have to coat the mRNA, the fake one, with a coating of nanoparticles so that it can't be seen by the body, because as soon as you inject it, the body would attack it. And so they've encased it in these nanoparticles. In some cases, people are having reactions to the nanoparticles, negative health effects from the nanoparticles. And the drawback to this idea, because nothing in life is perfect, statistics are against you. Anything you do in the lab, anything that's man-made, that's screwing around with great nature, always has some kind of problem. And the problem is based on just straight old statistics. You can't get away from it. We know that 80% will be effective on a bell curve, 20% will be funky, and 2% of that 20% will be deadly. So any kind of vaccine that you put out is going to have that rule, including the mRNA. The difficulties are mRNA is like Mission Impossible. When you listen to the message after it's over, it self-destructs. So the mRNA imparts its little blueprint and then it self-destructs so that the DNA only makes that one run. It says, make 50 of these. After it makes 50, that's it. Now it's just sitting there waiting for the next instruction. But we know that a certain percentage on a bell curve are not going to stop, that the DNA will continue making and continue and continue. It'll be locked in a loop it can't get out of. That becomes a problem. Because when it's pumping out the spike protein into the body and all of the COVID-19 viruses have been dismantled because their spike proteins have been attacked by the immune system and they're not viable anymore. Yet the cells, your cells, are still pumping out more spike proteins because it's locked in a cycle it can't get out of, just based on the bell curve, 20%. Now the immune system is going to start to be following these spike proteins back to who's making them. And when it finds out that your cells are making them, then your immune system attacks you. And this is the deaths that we've been seeing from massive anaphylactic shocks from the injection of this vaccine. People are dying from a massive autoimmune disease. Other people are just getting a severe autoimmune disease that doesn't go away. So they'll have a lifetime problem of autoimmune diseases that they'll never be the same. And that's where we're getting weird things like blood clots that are killing people in Europe. So now 3 countries in Europe have banned the Johnson & Johnson vaccine because of blood clot deaths and complications. And the rest are attacking organs like the brain and the gut and the heart and the lungs. And there's always the difficulty, because we're screwing around with DNA, that this will be a generational thing, that it'll get passed to your children, and it won't show up for a generation or two. Anyway, aside from that, the the rules and regulations buried in the DNA here. The body is a very complex system with a whole bunch of different systems interlinked together in very precise ways, and they all influence each other's function. But at the core of it are just a couple of rules, basic rules. Rule number 1, survive at all costs. And like I said before, if you don't do that, if you don't mobilize 100% of all available energy to fight for your life, then what's the point? If you don't mobilize 100% and you die, you're dying like an idiot because you didn't give it your full attention. So, rule number 1, your full attention, please. Survive at all costs. Mobilize all available energy. Suspend all other activities and shuttle energy into your muscles to fight for your life. Number 2, do no self-harm unless it breaks rule number 1. So do no self-harm unless it's going to cost you your life. For instance, you would have permission to chew your own foot off if it was caught in a trap that would cause you to starve to death. Better to be alive with no foot. A subset of rule number 2 is don't waste life energy. Get the most work with the least amount of energy expended. Be ecological. Always be searching for how to get double, triple duty out of every body system. Jump to conclusions, cut corners. We've seen how this subset of rule number 2 is used by the body, which is basically how come when we're listening to binaural beats through headphones, it forces the hemispheres to synchronize. Because the brain is obeying rule number 1. This is weird. Is this a threat? So I start to try to get the 2 hemispheres to compare notes to see if these 2 tones that the other ear can't hear are as a threat or not. So that forces this to happen for them to talk. And once this starts to happen, the 2 hemispheres jump to a conclusion that there should be this wah-wah, the pulsing difference between the 2 frequencies of the binaural beats. It should be there, so there the brain jumps to a conclusion based on rule number 2A. Jump to a conclusion, save life energy, cut corners. So it's cutting a corner, manufacturing the pulse it's in training to out of nowhere. And the real wah-wah never actually arrives because that requires, the collision of air molecules between 2 speakers. So we see these kind of rules played out over and over and over again in all kinds of different ways that the body is designed based on obeying these rules. It's a magnificent, amazing system of how those 2 basic rules and a subset of rule number 2 govern all the unimaginable complexity of all these body systems woven together and functioning in sort of a mind numbing, cosmic kind of dance that makes it all work somehow, that we're alive. With all the differentiation of the organs and the glands and the neural network and the nerves and the blood vessels and the lymphatic systems, and it's just amazing. All the unimaginable systems that are interlinked together and influence each other's function from a basic blueprint in DNA with a couple of basic rules to follow. Organs and glands, and the brain overseeing the function of all these different systems, the autonomic nervous system and the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, all of that, plus the metaphysical systems, where muscles and tendons and sense organs throughout the system to monitor its position sense and its movement and its stretch and compressions of the muscles, and 3D location in space. It's just sort of mind-boggling. Basically, we've got these core systems, the skeletal system and the muscular system and the circulatory system, which I would include here the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system, and the heart system. So red here is arteries and blue is veins, but the lungs are here. You see those, the white ones. The lungs are here oxygenating that blood, and these are intimately tied together. Actually, in school, you study them as one unit called cardiopulmonary physiology. You can't really separate one from the other. They're too intimately tied together. This is the nervous system, brain, spinal cord, nerve roots. And of course, in here is the autonomic part of the nervous system with the vagus nerve and the sympathetic chain that govern organ and glands and automatic functions. And then there's the digestive system that breaks down our food into biochemical products, and those biochemistry products are the fuel that the nervous system uses to call the shots and tell everybody what to do. And aside from these 5 basic intertwined systems, the extra systems are like the acupuncture system, this unbelievable network of lines that flow through the body of lowered skin resistance to electrical flow. There's no tube there, like I said before. There's potential spaces for lowered resistance to electrical flow. And in reality is one gigantic meridian divided into 12 parts, and each part is associated with an organ or a gland. Somehow the Chinese figured this out 5,000 years ago, these electrical circuits. They called it qi. And all these places where these electric circuits communicate to the surface of the skin as these acupuncture points that the body can control automatically by lowering the skin resistance over selected points to draw more electromagnetic energy into the channel for healing and rebalancing. And that's what the needle is doing, acting like a little antenna to pull energy, ions, into this channel. I can stimulate those with a positive field magnet or a laser or a sound wave. As I said before, last time, it's not just as simple as the channels that we normally see in an acupuncture chart. Those actually channels go inside the body and circulate through various organs that are part of that meridian. This one here is the spleen channel. It enters the body where the left channel flows into the spleen and then spirally wraps the stomach. Internal branches ascend from this conception vessel 12 point into the heart, on and on. All of this is mapped. Here's another one, the stomach meridian, where it from stomach 12 goes inward into the diaphragm, and it's just amazing how every single meridian has been charted in deep circulation channels as well as the surface channels. And then the other system is the chakra system, a metaphysical connection system between the physical body and the metaphysical body, whirling vortexes of energy that pull ever finer degrees of prana from ordinary air through these four sort of step-up transformers. I had 3 whole live broadcasts on the chakras, so go back and watch those if you want to see everything that's detailed about this, and their organ and gland connections and their meridian connections. But even all the way back to the ancient literature, we have what was described as Ida and Pingala and Sushumna. Sushumna is the central channel, that's the spinal cord and brain. And Ida and Pingala is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. And diagrammatically, every place these two cross over each other is a chakra, a nexus point. And the chakra system is linked into glands. The glands are linked into the vagus nerve, into autonomic control, like everything else. And then the extended energy vortexes spread throughout the body and beyond the nadis, the 7 main chakras, and then the harmonic chakras that extend beyond the crown and below the root, and auxiliary chakras at various nodes around the body. Then there's a whole biochemistry aspect. All the organs are sort of little wetware factories that are manufacturing something for the body, and they have waste products that dump into the blood, and doing a blood test can analyze the waste products to see if they're within normal range, to see if you're functioning okay. But the biochemistry is a whole other thing of its own, that it could be a life study, just the biochemistry part, because now we're dealing with compounds, with atoms and atomic structures. And then there's the the brain-gut connection that I talked about last time, and the connector is the vagus nerve. It innervates the gut, where the brain and the gut are in actual communication with each other through the vagus nerve, and the biome in the gut are communicating to the brain, in some cases with electrical discharges from certain populations of these bacteria that produce waves of depolarization of ions, just like brain cells. So there's sort of brain wave activity communicated to the brain itself through the vagus nerve. Our body and these foreign critters with different DNA are in active communication with one another on a moment-by-moment basis. Back when I was a kid, growing up in the 50s, those are the days when they didn't know what the tonsils did or the appendix. They thought it was a vestigial, didn't do anything. Since they didn't know what it did, then they figured it's fine to cut them out. So what happens is the tonsils get really big and swollen, and if it got swollen to enough that it started to close off your windpipe, then there was an emergency surgery to remove the tonsils, which, like all things in medicine, drifted into a sort of standard practice. Anytime you got a sore throat, they'd remove your tonsils, whether they were life-threatening or not. Anytime they got a little swollen, they'd be cut out. And the idea there being, well, we don't know what it does, therefore it must not do anything because we are all knowing, right? Nature made some big mistake. God made a mistake, stuck those things in there. They're not useful anymore, but they're still there for some reason, so we can feel free to cut them out. Same with the appendix. I mean, my joke with the appendix was that someday in the future they'll find out it was the organ of extrasensory perception or something. But now we know, that the tonsils have a very important job, and so does the appendix. I mean, the tonsils are part of the immune system, and they're down there in your throat to protect your lungs. So if push is going to come to shove, and you're going to get some kind of virus or bacterial infection, that usually invades the nose, rhinoviruses, they go into your nose and they go down your pharynx, and they're headed towards your lungs. So the body says, well, wait a second, the lungs are more important than my throat, so therefore I'm going to put these special things in my throat to catch those and grab them up and store them in the tonsils. The tonsils are going to get big and swollen with all the bad guys that they're catching and locking in jail. But it's not going to get to the lungs, because I can live without talking, but I can't live without breathing. So that was the job of the tonsils and then it turned into preemptive tonsil removal before you ever got a sore throat. Little Johnny would just make an appointment to go have his tonsils removed so we could prevent sore throats in the future. And that whole generation of children who had their tonsils removed in the 50s, in some cases the 60s, are the ones who have chronic upper respiratory infections, chronic walking pneumonia, chronic problems with lungs. That things go straight to the lungs because there's no guardian at the door in the throat anymore. And the same thing here now with the appendix. They finally discovered that the appendix is the repository, the seed bank for the biome. So the population of the biome in the gut is very specific. It's 25,000 different population groups, and each have specific things to do, and they all network together and communicate with the brain back and forth. And so this is sort of a safety backup system. All the representative biome population groups are represented here as seeds. In case something would happen where you would get some kind of a horrible gut flu or something that would destroy the biome, you could always repopulate it from the seed bank. That's what this was all about. The problem with the appendix is that it would get inflamed and infected and swollen, and if it burst, it would penetrate all of this bad bacteria into the peritoneum, and that could be life-threatening. And it's my feeling that the chronic appendicitis issues that began to emerge around the late 40s and the 50s and on were from the beginning of use of antibiotics. So now we're going to throw antibiotics into your body, which will nuke the gut and kill all the biome, and including kill the seed bank. And now the gut is going to be taken over by random bacteria. Somebody's going to repopulate the gut, but it's not going to be the regular guys who are supposed to be there in their perfectly balanced patchwork quilt of all these different biome populations who are working together. That's been destroyed. Who's going to take up housekeeping now is a random assortment of good guys and bad guys, and it's like the Old West. It's like the Louisiana Purchase when they opened up the huge amount of the interior of the U.S. for anybody who wanted to go and claim a stake. So they had, the gold rush of America, where people are in their rat wagons and horses racing across the country, putting down stakes. This is now my land. That's what happens in the gut, except it's bad guys. And good guys and everything else, you're never the same. And we have generations of people in our population whose gut has been ransacked and ruined by chronic overuse of antibiotics. And now the bad guys, when they get into the appendix, they're the ones that create the swelling and the infection, and because the seed bank has been destroyed by antibiotics. Now, we're in the era of the discovery of new systems in the body that we never knew were there before. I mean, I find this extremely fascinating. I mean, I've studied in the greatest depth that we know of in modern culture, a medical level of anatomy and physiology and lab science and biochemistry and all the rest. I've learned that. And it's hard to believe that in all of these decades, hundreds of years of anatomy, that we actually missed major organs in the body, major functions we missed. It's amazing. I mean, this one, Scientific American, an important link between the brain and the immune system is found. A new line of communication prompts rethinking of neurological disease. So when I was going to school, it was, here's a great word, pathognomonic, which means written in stone. It was like everybody understood that the brain is separated distinctly from the rest of the body and has no immune system. It has macrophages for cleaning waste, but it doesn't have an immune response because of the blood-brain barrier closes it off. But now they've discovered that's not so. They've discovered that there is a specific immune system that's part of the brain and the spinal cord and the nerve network. Astounding. And then they discovered that the heart is an endocrine gland. I had mentioned this the last time, that in the chakras, the heart is a muscle, it's not an endocrine gland. And there's an endocrine gland associated with each of the chakras. The thyroid and the parathyroid, and the thymus is here. So I always thought it was the thymus chakra, not the heart chakra, but now it turns out that the heart is actually redefined as an endocrine gland. Evidence presented here indicates that atriocardiocytes, apart from their contractile function, are bona fide endocrine cells which synthesize a peptide known in composition through identified pathways and blah, blah, blah. What it does, there's two hormones produced by the heart. One affects the atrium and one affects the ventricles. And this particular one, the atrial natriuretic peptide, is released in response to triggers including the stretch of the atrial muscle group. It increases sodium and thus water excretion by the kidneys, reducing blood volume and thus blood pressure. So the hormone produced by the heart is having a direct effect on the kidneys and blood volume, which affects blood pressure directly from inside the heart as a hormone. Pretty amazing. However, that now means that this truly is the heart chakra. It's actually the heart thymus chakra. So the heart has something to do with the blood and oxygenation and emotions. And the thymus is the seat of the immune system. Here's more science news. A new pain organ has been discovered in 2019. Researchers have discovered a new sensory organ that is able to detect painful mechanical damage such as pricks and impacts. This is basically, up to this point, which means if I poke my skin and deform it, I could cause some pain. If I put too much pressure, almost a crush injury, there are mechanical receptors in there that are give me information of compression, but that's not pain. And this is saying that there's special pain sensors in the skin for that specific type of pushing too hard or poking too hard. But the fact that there's a new pain organ that is in the skin is, again, mind-blowing. And then recently, within this last year, a new discovery has had to do with the brain and sleep. This is astounding information that the brain is washed during sleep. A new BU Boston University study reveals the first ever images of cerebral spinal fluid washing in and out of the brain during sleep. And online, this is an animation where you see this red color is coming and going. This is the cerebral spinal fluid. It's actually bigger than that. It's new research from Boston University suggests that tonight while you sleep, something amazing will happen within your brain. Your neurons will go quiet. A few seconds later, blood will flow out of your head. Blood will flow out of your head. Then a watery liquid called cerebral spinal fluid will flow in, washing through your brain in rhythmic, pulsing waves, like brain waves. The study, published in October 31st Science, is the first to illustrate that the brain's cerebral spinal fluid pulses during sleep and that these motions are closely tied with brain wave activity and blood flow. So it means in the delta portion of sleep, the physical recuperation portion of sleep, that's my definition. And the reason I say that is because that's when we go into the lowest respiration, heart rate, body temperature, lowest metabolic rate of all the cells. That's when the body gets most quiescent. And that's when I think the body is being healed for the next day, recalibrated. And this is showing that is true, because the slow wave delta activity is what's associated with the brainwave activity that's in sync with the pulses of the cerebral spinal fluid. I talked at length about cerebral spinal fluid in last broadcast. It's from the old days, from the mystic Gurdjieff, who came over in the 20s, talked about this esoteric information from the secret societies in the East about a second sacred blood, a second circulatory system that was inside and out of regular blood. And as it turns out, regular blood, the blood plasma, which is the base fluid, without the red and white blood cells, you scrape all those out and all you've got is this clear fluid. That's blood plasma. It's an electrolyte. It's got electrolytic properties. And cerebral spinal fluid is indistinguishable from blood plasma, and it's also an electrolyte, but the electrolytic properties are 100% reversed in mirror image of blood plasma. It's a reverse electrolyte, and it's bathing the brain, and it's charging up all the neurons and making all the neuron firings in the brain 10 times more efficient. That's why cerebral spinal fluid is important to be pumping and moving and flowing in the cranial pump, and the craniosacral pump mechanism is what makes that happen. All very important stuff. But if you think about it, the cerebral spinal fluid flows between the membranes that wrap around the brain and out the nerve roots. So the nerve root is covered with a layer of membranes, and the nerve is solid with membranes around it, and the cerebral spinal fluid is flowing on the outside of a solid nerve, where the blood is flowing on the inside of a hollow tube. That is inside out and backwards, just like they said in the East. That the sacred secondary blood, the sacred blood, the cerebral spinal fluid, is an inside-out circulatory system, flowing on the outside of a solid nerve instead of on the inside of a hollow tube. Then they also discovered something called the glymphatic system in the brain. 2015, researchers defined a system in the human body which they call the glymphatic system, a system which removes waste from the brain and detoxifies the brain, a discovery that could mean a world of difference for neurological conditions. This new research has been a major system of attention in functional medicine and functional nutrition. This glymphatic brain is closely associated with this cerebral spinal fluid washing the brain and washing toxins and debris. And later research more recently has shown that the cerebral spinal fluid washing of the brain is removing the plaque buildup on the brain that we see associated with Alzheimer's disease. This is even more recent. This is just in the last couple of months. This is scientists discovered a new organ in the throat. It's here, right here, at the back of the pharynx, right behind the nose. A secret set of salivary glands has been hiding behind the nose. And this produces a certain type of sort of saliva that lubricates the throat all the way down into the voice box. So this is closely associated with swallowing and vocalization and lubricating the throat, so all these kind of things move properly. And here's a new organ that was discovered a number of years ago, the mesentery. So, you know, all the organs in your abdominal cavity, the kidneys and the large and small intestine and the liver and the stomach and the spleen and the pancreas and all of that, all of those are wrapped around with this tight sheet of fibroelastic tissue. And it folds back and forth across itself in funny ways in the gut. And they just discovered that it folds itself in such a way that it actually creates a space that's filled with fluid. And it's part of the immune system. And it's part of the debris cleaning system of the entire body. The mesentery is this area in the gut that is a new organ that's part of how the system cleans debris and detoxifies the large and small intestine. Another organ discovered, mind-blowing. And then here's another one. A brand new human organ has been classified. Oh, this is the same one. This is the mesentery. So this is a different view of the mesentery, small and large intestine. It's this sheet that folds on itself. Researchers have classified a brand new organ inside our bodies, one that's been hiding in plain sight in our digestive system this whole time. Although we now know about the structure of this new organ, its function is still poorly understood, and studying it could be a key to better understanding and treatment of abdominal digestive disease. Later research since 2017 has definitely shown that the fluid-filled spaces inside the mesentery definitely are associated with macrophage activity and cleaning toxins and part of the immune response. Here's more. The largest organ in the body may have just been discovered, and it could reshape our understanding of human anatomy. Researchers have identified a network of fluid-filled spaces surrounded by connective tissue that fills the spaces between our organs, surrounding and potentially protecting our insides throughout our body. In a study, scientists defined this network as a new organ, the interstitium, which they say could be the largest organ in the human body. Understanding this network as an organ could help us understand how diseases like cancer spread, and it helped explain what healing techniques like acupuncture are tapping into. What's happening here is every part of your body and everything in it is wrapped around with sort of saran wrap. Some of it's called fascia. The interstitium is wrapped around everything. Everything is bundled and wrapped, and then those are wrapped. And It's everywhere, throughout your whole body. Every single organ, every gland, the skeletal system, the immune system, the blood vessels, everything is wrapped with interstitium. But the interstitium itself is wrapped upon itself in such a way that it also creates a space filled with fluid, which has just been discovered. So it's like the full body version of the mesentery in the gut, a new part of a fluid-filled network throughout the body that can transfer biochemical products any place through the body. So that's how they're suspecting that perhaps this is how metastasis happens. We'll have one organ wrapped with interstitium, and it's got cancer cells that are exploding out, and those cancer cells make their way into the interstitium, and now they have access to any part of the body through this fluid-filled network. And it seems to be there's some kind of relationship to acupuncture there that I have to dig more into to find out, because this is the only reference I've seen to acupuncture when I was researching that for today's broadcast. So I have to dig into this a bit more to find out. But Scientific American meets your interstitium, a newfound organ. Fluid-filled spaces were found in the body's connective tissue. It's everywhere. Your fluid superhighway. Fluid-filled cavities are around everything in your body, which drains into the lymphatic system. Also plays a role in immunity. So God knows what's going to be next. New organs associated with ions and energy and acupuncture and perhaps precognitive ability and other states of the brain that go into metaphysical realms. We don't know what's going to be next. But what we know is that we're in a completely new era of discovery. And it's only a matter of time where more and more places like the California Institute for Human Science, which, by the way, I'm back on the faculty there. They've invited me to come back. So I'm beginning to teach coursework there once more. California Institute for Human Science. If you're interested, sign up. On the other hand, please, for what we're attempting to do here with linking everybody's mind and brainwaves together into a single state in order to make an influence on the quantum field to change reality, to change our own reality. Tell as many people as you can. Spread the word. And thank you. Now, I've created another soundtrack. These series of soundtracks in the Esoteric Anatomy are deep meditative soundtracks. So get prepared for going into other dimensional sound field where things are in 3D moving around. It's sort of a beatific sound space that's taking you nowhere but here to contemplate the DNA behind your navel and what it could be like. And what are the new discoveries about me that I need to find? That's where we're going today. So, headphones, please. Heaven knows what's next, but it's an exciting journey that we're on, where all this is going. So, close your eyes and here we go. So one more thing. Since the COVID pandemic, many of us have been forced to reinvent our whole lives. Me, for one, particularly invent my life online, which is directly where this came from, these live streams. And also we've redesigned our website, created a completely new website. I have 3 separate companies. One is Center for Neuroacoustic Research. That's where we research these effects. I research them clinically in my clinic practice. That's my 3rd company. And then the result of that become a series of soundtracks that are for sale on that website. And that site is called the Scientific Sounds website. But we also have a second website that we've erected, the Center for Neuroacoustic Research, and that more is the training of practitioners. When I put these different workshops on and I have to move this to Monday, that's what that's all about. I have advanced practitioners workshops also, but now I've added something I used to do in the past, which is a day-long workshop for the general public on various subjects. The complete overview, a day-long workshop on brain entrainment and brain states and states of consciousness and how we can manipulate that for high-tech meditation. Another workshop on the use of sound for healing. It's these kind of workshops I'm doing as 40-hour courses for the California Institute for Human Science for PhD credits. For college credits, but that's that's a big thing associated with the California Institute for Human Science. But for me, I'm doing day-long workshops, and those are just beginning. And if you want to find out about those, this is the address: Center for Neuroacoustic Research.com/webinars. We are also redesigning the Scientific Sounds website, the one that has all of the soundtracks and CDs and downloads and sound tables and sound chairs and all the other stuff that we have. We're redesigning that website as well, and redesigning the complete sound store as well. And that will be up and running soon, so keep an eye out. If you go and look at the Scientific Sounds website now, it will completely change and be different in the next month, maybe in the next couple of weeks. I'm not exactly sure when we're going to stick that on. We're just double checking everything and make sure it's all smooth and works well. Meantime, thank you all very much for continuing to be here for these live streams. It's an important thing to do.